I grew up in a two-story white house on Cedar Street in Columbus, Ohio. The shutters were faded green, and the front porch sagged slightly in the middle as if it carried the weight of all the years we had lived there. To me, it was not just wood and nails. It was a diary written in walls and echoes. The stairs always knew my steps, creaking in rhythm as if they were sighing, "You're home." The kitchen smelled like cinnamon toast on winter mornings, like grilled cheese in the late afternoons, and like Sunday roast when the sun went down. My mother, Ruth, loved to keep the windows bright, scrubbing them until the glass looked almost invisible. My father, Mark, fixed every hinge, every doorknob, every loose nail, as though the house was a sacred trust he had been given. My sister, Amanda, the youngest of us, filled the halls with laughter that bounced around like it didn't want to leave. Growing up in that house, I never imagined the day would come when I would be forced out of it, not just physically, but in spirit. I thought home was forever. I thought family meant unshakable roots. But roots can be cut, and houses can spit you out. When I met Scott Cole in New York City, the ground shifted beneath my life in a way I had never felt before. Scott was unlike anyone I had ever met. He was quiet in the way that powerful people often are, as though he didn't need to prove anything. He really listened when I spoke. He asked questions about my dreams, about what I wanted to build, about the books I read when I couldn't sleep. People liked to talk about his money, about the billions he had made when he sold his payments company to a bank in Manhattan. $3 billion, they whispered, like it was the only thing worth knowing. But I knew him in worn sneakers, in plain shirts, in the way he tipped waiters with a kind smile and slipped an extra $50 into the hands of a cab driver with 4 kids. When Scott asked me to marry him, I said yes without hesitation. Not because of the money, not because of the life he could provide, but because when I looked into his eyes, I felt steady, safe. Like I had finally stepped into the version of myself I was always meant to be. People said I smiled differently after I got engaged, that it was as though some hidden part of me had been lit from within. They weren't wrong, but the happiness of that moment couldn't last untouched. About a month before our wedding, my parents called for a family talk. I knew from the tightness in my mother's voice that this wasn't going to be about flowers or invitations. Still, I walked into that old living room as though we were about to share tea and cookies, the kind we used to eat in front of the fire when Amanda and I were children. The house watched us that night, silent but heavy. "Cancel your wedding," my mother said without preamble. Her voice was sharp, not cruel, but final, like a verdict. Amanda's birthday is that weekend. It wouldn't be right to overshadow her day. My father leaned back, arms crossed, his eyes like stone. "Family first," he added, as though those 2 words were supposed to close the argument. I sat there for a moment, stunned. Cancel my wedding? For a birthday? Amanda, to her credit, looked as uncomfortable as I felt. She shrugged, her eyes down, as if she wished she could vanish into the old carpet. She never asked for this. I breathed deeply and answered calmly. "I can't cancel the wedding. It's planned, it's paid for, and it's my future. But we can throw Amanda the biggest birthday party the week after. I'll pay for everything. $20,000 for the best band in town, all the food and decorations she could want. She'll have the party of her life." I meant it. I wanted to make peace, to show them that compromise was possible. But when I looked at my parents' faces, I saw only hardness. No trace of the warmth that had once wrapped me like a blanket. "You can't be our daughter if you won't do this," my father said flatly. The words struck like ice water poured over my soul. I searched his face, hoping for some sign of hesitation, of regret, but there was none. My mother stood up, pointed to the door, and said, "Get out of this house." Something inside me cracked. I picked up my coat, my hands trembling, but my spine straight. I walked past the crooked photograph of me at age 10, gap-toothed, smiling, holding Amanda's hand, and I left my keys on the hall table. The clink of metal against wood sounded like the end of something I had once believed would never break. On the curb outside, the night air bit into my skin. I pulled out my phone with shaky fingers and called Scott. My voice was small when I said, "They told me to leave." He didn't try to explain it away. He didn't tell me to go back in or to fight harder. He just said with quiet certainty, "Come home. Our home." And so I went. His loft in Manhattan was all glass and light. The city spread out before me like sparks on black velvet. It felt like the opposite of Cedar Street, loud, alive, unapologetically bright. I sank into the couch, a $6 box of tissues on my lap, and cried until my throat ached. I cried for the house, for the cinnamon toast mornings, for Amanda's laughter echoing in the hallway. I cried because I had lost something that couldn't be replaced. But when I finally fell asleep, shoes still on my feet, I realized something. My parents thought they could force me to end my marriage by shutting me out. They thought they could trade my future for my sister's birthday, as though love was a calendar event that could be erased and rescheduled. They believed I would crumble under their rejection. They were wrong. I would not end the marriage. I would not beg to come back. I would build a new life, brick by brick, even if the first brick was laid in tears. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just their daughter. I was myself.
And that was enough.
The morning after I left my parents' house, I woke in Scott's loft with eyes swollen from crying but with a strange clarity in my chest. The city stretched outside the wide glass windows. Yellow cabs, flashing lights, and endless noise. But inside, there was a stillness I hadn't known in days. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat at the marble counter with a notebook, making a list. Lists always gave me comfort, as if putting words on paper could tame the chaos of life. I wrote down each wedding detail one by one, reminding myself that I was moving forward, no matter what storm had been left behind. Venue in Brooklyn. Paid in full, $120,000. Dress, simple silk, $3,500. Flowers, white peonies, $8,000. Security, 2 teams, $14,000. Then, after a pause, I added one more line. A seat for forgiveness. I didn't assign it a price. I didn't know yet if it would ever be filled. Later that morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. "Are you okay?" she asked. It was only 3 words, but they carried the weight of our bond. I told her I loved her. She wrote back, "I love you too." We sent a handful of silly memes, inside jokes from our teenage years, when we used to stay up all night watching comedies and whispering in the dark. But we didn't talk about our parents. It felt like walking on thin ice, both of us afraid to break through. By noon, Scott's best friend, Luis, called from Chicago. His voice was bright, full of energy. "Listen, I can get you a gospel choir," he said. "They're touring from Europe right now, and they're available for your date. £12,000. They'll shake the walls with their voices." I laughed for the first time in days.
"Book them," I said.
I wanted music that could lift me, voices that could drown out the echoes of rejection. My maid of honor, Jenna, was just as reliable. She booked a small jazz trio as backup in case the choir got delayed. I liked the idea of layers, one plan tucked behind another, a safety net I could trust. As the week wore on, I found myself drifting back to memories of the house on Cedar Street. The peeling wallpaper in the hallway, the attic that smelled of mothballs, the way my father's tools clinked in the garage late at night. I thought about what my parents had dreamed of for years, a little cottage by the lake, a place where they could retire and fish in peace. I had secretly planned to surprise them with $250,000 after the wedding to make that dream real. I even wrote the promise on fancy paper, sealed it in an envelope, and kept it in my drawer. I imagined handing it to them one day, showing them that I had never wanted to fight, that I was still their daughter. But now that envelope felt heavy, almost mocking. In the middle of all this, an email arrived from Fox News. They had heard whispers about the wedding guest list, politicians, business leaders, artists, and about the donation Scott and I planned to make. We had decided to give $1 million to a scholarship fund for girls in public schools across America. I wanted girls who felt invisible to know they had choices, that doors could open for them, no matter where they started. Fox asked if they could cover the wedding and film the check handoff. At first, I hesitated. The idea of cameras circling around such a personal day made my stomach twist. But then I thought about those girls, their faces lit up by opportunity, and I agreed, on one condition. You film the students more than us, I said. If this wedding was going to be on television, let it be for something bigger than flowers and champagne. On Thursday, my phone lit up again. This time it was a voicemail from my mother. Her voice was sharp, almost brittle.
You are selfish, she said.
You have chosen money over blood. I listened once, then pressed save. I didn't want to erase her words. I wanted to remember exactly what she had said, not to torture myself, but to remind myself why I couldn't go back. Saving my heart meant accepting her cruelty and then moving forward anyway.
So I pressed on.
Seating charts sprawled across the dining table, names written in careful ink. I booked hotel shuttles from New Jersey for out-of-town guests. I even arranged a quiet room at the venue for anyone who needed a break from the noise, a little sanctuary tucked away, because I knew how overwhelming big events could be. Planning the details felt like piecing together a puzzle. Each decision was another small brick in the life Scott and I were building. On Friday evening, just as the city lights began to glow against the darkening sky, the gospel choir arrived from London. Their voices filled the rehearsal hall before I even saw them. Deep, resonant, powerful, it was like sunlight breaking through clouds. They hummed as they unpacked, their harmonies weaving together until the air itself seemed to vibrate. I stood in the doorway, unable to move, tears welling in my eyes. For a moment, it felt like the whole week's pain was being lifted on their voices, carried away to somewhere I couldn't follow. That night, I crawled into bed earlier than usual. My body was exhausted, but my mind was restless. When I finally drifted into sleep, I dreamed of doors. Wooden doors, iron doors, glass doors, each one waiting for me. In the dream, I reached out my hand, and every door I touched swung open without resistance. Behind each one was a different room, a library full of books, a kitchen filled with laughter, a garden blooming with roses. I woke just before dawn, the image of all those open doors still clear in my mind. For the first time since leaving Cedar Street, I felt a strange kind of hope. My parents had locked one door to me forever, but life was not a single hallway. There were countless doors ahead, and I was learning that I could open them myself. The morning of my wedding broke clean and bright, as if the sky itself had been scrubbed for me. New York had that rare kind of clarity in the air, where the light feels sharper, almost new. From the hotel balcony in Brooklyn, I could see the East River winding like a long ribbon, glittering beneath the sun. Across the water, Manhattan looked like it had been carved from silver and glass, standing tall and unapologetic. I breathed in deeply, willing myself to carry that same steadiness. Inside, the room buzzed with movement. Hairspray hung faintly in the air, curling irons clicked, zippers zipped. My maid of honor, Jenna, paced with her clipboard, whispering instructions to the makeup artists. 2 minutes on the lips, let's go. People, she said, half joking but mostly serious. The gospel choir we had flown in from London was rehearsing in the courtyard below, their voices floating upward in harmonies, so powerful I felt the windows tremble. Each note reminded me that today was real, that today was mine. When I slipped into my dress, a simple silk gown that cost less than most of the flower arrangements, it felt like putting on truth. No lace, no glitter, no unnecessary weight. Just clean lines and fabric that moved when I breathed. Scott had told me once that I looked like a sentence when I walked. Clear, strong, and complete. Today I wanted to feel exactly like that. No doubt, no hesitation. The ceremony began just after noon, with the river sparkling behind us. Rows of guests settled into their seats, a mix of old friends, colleagues, and strangers who had become part of Scott's vast world. I spotted Luis grinning at me from the second row, Amanda sitting quietly beside Jenna, and business leaders whose faces I had only seen in magazines. Jade, our planner, gave a discreet signal, and the choir began. Their voices filled the air, deep and rising, lifting hearts higher than the skyscrapers across the river. Fox News had set up 2 cameras and a small table near the garden, careful not to intrude, but determined to capture every angle. Claire, the anchor assigned to cover the event, was poised and calm in a navy suit. At one point, she leaned toward me with a microphone and asked, "How does it feel to give away $1 million to students you'll never meet?" I didn't hesitate. "It feels like breathing," I said. And I meant it. Giving was not a loss. It was the only way to expand. Scott stood waiting for me under the arch of white peonies, his suit perfectly tailored, but his smile slightly crooked. The smile I had fallen in love with. When he took my hands, he whispered, "We're here." Just those 2 words, but they held the weight of everything. The battles fought, the doors closed, the new ones opened. My voice was steady as I repeated my vows, my promise to build with him, not just to love him. He spoke his vows with the quiet certainty of a man who had already kept them in his heart long before speaking them aloud. As the choir swelled behind us, Jade signaled to the jazz trio, and soft notes floated between the choir's powerful chords. The music was seamless, one sound melting into another like different shades of the same color. The guests clapped, someone sniffled, and I laughed, an unguarded, joyous sound that surprised even me. For one suspended moment, I forgot the shouting in the house on Cedar Street, the slammed doors, the bitter words. For one suspended moment, I was simply a bride in love under the blue sky of America. And then I saw them. At the back gate, beyond the security guards, my parents stood. My father's shoulders were rigid, his jaw clenched. My mother's eyes searched the crowd, wild and desperate. They must have seen the news coverage, the cameras, the headlines about a billionaire's wedding and the $1 million donation. They must have realized what they had thrown away, what they had demanded I cancel. Now they were here, pushing forward as though they could simply reclaim the place they had cast me out of. My father waved at a guard, his voice booming. My mother called my name, her voice cutting through the music. I felt the envelope in my clutch, the one I had prepared, the promise of a lake cottage for them, a gift of $250,000 meant as peace. My hand closed around it, heavy in my palm, heavy with all the love I had once thought unconditional. For a moment, I wondered if this could be our second chance, if I should step aside and let them in. But then I remembered the night on Cedar Street, my father's voice declaring, "You can't be our daughter." My mother pointed to the door, her face close to me. I remembered the weight of my keys on the hall table, the coldness of the street outside, the way my heart had cracked. That night had not been an accident. It had been a choice. I walked forward, heels sinking slightly into the grass, until I stood near the guards. "Please escort Ruth and Mark to the street," I said firmly. "They're not guests." My voice did not tremble. The crowd grew quiet, pretending not to watch, but unable to look away. My mother gasped, clutching her chest as though I had struck her. My father tried to argue, tried to step around the guards, but they were kind and professional. They did their job. People turned their eyes to their shoes, uncomfortable but silent. The Brooklyn wind picked up, scattering peony petals across the lawn like small boats drifting away. I slid the envelope back into my clutch and zipped it shut. Some gifts were never meant to be given. The rest of the afternoon carried on like a dream I both lived and observed. We cut the cake, its tiers frosted in pale ivory. We danced our first dance to a song that had carried us through late nights of planning, through arguments, through laughter. The choir sang again, their voices strong enough to wash the ache from my chest. Claire asked for one last shot of the choir with the river behind them, the skyline blazing in the background. I smiled for the camera, but when the lens lingered, I looked away. I didn't want the focus on me. I wanted it on the girls who would one day walk into classrooms they never thought they'd enter, who would read books they never thought they could afford, who would find their own doors swinging wide open. As the sun set, the city lights flickered awake, and music spilled into the night air. My wedding was no longer just a celebration of love. It was proof that I could build something even after being told I was nothing. It was proof that rejection didn't end me. It freed me, and so, beneath the wide sky of America, I let go of the house that had thrown me out and stepped fully into the life I was making for myself. The morning after the wedding, I woke as a wife for the first time. The hotel room smelled faintly of clean sheets and citrus polish, sunlight spilling through the tall curtains in golden stripes. For a moment, I lay still, unsure if it had all been a dream. The choir, the vows, the cameras, even the faces at the gate. Then I rolled over and saw Scott sitting in the armchair, the newspaper spread across his lap. His tie from the night before was still on the dresser, neatly folded. "They ran a kind story," he said, looking up at me with that steady smile. His eyes were tired but soft. "Good," I answered, stretching against the sheets. "Now, let's live one." That line came out of me without thought, but the weight of it sat with me all morning. We had built a story together in public, one the world could watch on Fox News, but now it was time to write the private story, the one no camera would capture. By noon, we had packed our bags and left the hotel. No grand procession, no paparazzi trailing us, just Scott driving US north in his quiet way, hands steady on the wheel of the car. We wound out of the city and into the softer greens of upstate New York. The skyscrapers gave way to rolling hills, and the noise of Manhattan faded until the only sounds were the hum of the tires and the occasional bird cutting across the sky. We pulled into the driveway of a small blue house with a wide porch, set back among the trees. It wasn't a mansion, not a penthouse, not one of the sprawling estates people imagined billionaires lived in. It was modest by Scott's standards, but perfect to me. We had paid $480,000 in cash, avoiding the endless paperwork that would have stretched for months. We called it North Door. When I stepped inside, barefoot, the room smelled like fresh paint and sawdust. I walked slowly, touching each wall as though it were alive, whispering silent thanks for shelter. This house wasn't just wood and glass, it was proof. Proof that I could lose one home and still build another. Proof that I didn't need Cedar Street to anchor me. That evening, I sat at the small desk by the window and wrote Amanda a letter. My hand trembled as I began, but the words poured out. I told her that I would always be her sister, no matter what distance or silence stretched between us. I reminded her of cinnamon toast mornings, of the way we used to jump on the creaky stairs two at a time, of the Saturday cartoons that made us laugh until milk came out of our noses. I told her I missed her, truly missed her, and I hoped she had the best birthday of her life. I did not ask her to choose between me and our parents. That was a weight I refused to place on her shoulders. At the end of the letter, I tucked in a 50-pound note, a small joke only she would understand. Years ago, during our cheap college trip through Europe, we lived on tea and day-old bread, carrying a single note like it was treasure. I could still see her laugh in the dim hostel light, waving that crumpled bill and declaring we were rich in adventure. I knew she would laugh again when she saw it. The days after the wedding slipped into something soft and steady. Instead of flying off on a grand honeymoon across oceans, Scott and I chose America in small bites. We drove to Boston first, wandering cobblestone streets with cups of hot coffee in our hands. We listened to history echo in the old meeting houses, touched the worn stones where revolution had sparked. From there, we went south to Washington, D.C., walking past monuments that gleamed in the sunlight, each one a reminder of the cost of freedom and the weight of choices. Our final stop was Maine, where the coast stretched sharp and rugged, the water dark like steel. The wind was cold and salty, rushing against my cheeks until they stung. We walked along the shoreline, our shoes sinking into damp sand, and for the first time in weeks, I felt small in the best way possible. Just one woman, one wife, one heart beating against the vastness of the world. When we returned to North Door, I unpacked slowly. At the bottom of my clutch was the envelope I had once prepared for my parents, the promise of $250,000 for their dream lake cottage. I sat on the bed, holding it in my hands, the weight pressing down like stone. My first instinct was to mail it, to extend that hand again, to try once more to buy peace. But as I looked around at the house we had built, at the walls already learning the sound of my footsteps, I realized some gifts are not meant to be given. I took out a box from the closet, labeled it "Not Today," and slipped the envelope inside. Some things need time. Some doors need knocking from both sides. Until that day came, if it ever came, I would not carry the burden anymore. In the weeks that followed, I planted a small garden in the yard, rows of lavender and rosemary that perfumed the air when I brushed past. I learned the rhythm of the porch boards beneath my feet, the way they groaned in the evening when the sun sank. I cooked dinner with Scott in our little kitchen, pasta boiling while jazz played low on the speaker. And every night, when the lights went out, I felt the silence of the house settle around us, warm and whole. I was no longer the girl who begged to stay in a house that pushed her out. I was the woman who built her own. My name is Emma Cole. I live in America. I carry $10 in my pocket for tips and a list in my head of who I love. I know what it feels like to be told I don't belong, and I know what it feels like to belong anyway. If my parents ever knock on my door, I might turn on the porch light. I might even let them step inside. But the rule is simple now. No one throws me out of my life. Not ever again.